Weather news from coast to coast this Friday at the services honoring JFK in Dallas today. Crowds have been shivering in 30-degree temperatures and rain. Two of the scheduled events were canceled, including the Missing Man flyover.
And now to Southern California. At almost this exact moment, 50 years ago, the presidential power was being transferred from John Fitzgerald Kennedy to Lyndon B. Johnson. According to many, it's not just Kennedy's presidency that was laid to rest that day. It was also the end of innocence in America. What followed, Oswald's murder, the conspiracy theories, and the fears stoked by the Warren Commission. For many Americans, their trust of government wasn't just pierced, it was shattered. Fast forward now to 2013, a president has never since had an approval rating as high as JFK's, and 9% of Americans have confidence in Congress. 9%. We can never reclaim our innocence, but we can reclaim our faith in government, maybe. Joining us now is Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today. And Susan, the trust that your government is truly looking for, people want to know that the government is out for their best interest. Do you think it is possible to get back to that place?
People want to think the government is out for their best interest, and they also want to think that the government can actually do things in a competent way. That's another aspect that has made it so hard for Americans to have the kind of faith and trust in their government that they had before the Kennedy assassination. Certainly the landscape now looks so different, and the kind of nature of the politics, especially here in Washington, it's just really contrasts with what was existing in 1963.
Well, and, Susan, I wanted to get your thoughts on an editorial that ran in the San Francisco Chronicle talking about the extreme rhetoric of then versus now. And, of course, famously, JFK, as they were landing, said to Jacqueline Kennedy, "We're heading into nut country." And what they said in the article was, in 1963, nut country, both left and right wing, was confined to pockets like Dallas around the country. Now, extreme speech like the kind heard in Dallas 50 years ago has become mainstream, particularly on the right, amplified by social media and encouraged by gridlock political leaders looking to win the political minute. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's certainly, there's always been extreme voices in American politics, but now everybody can read them. They have a huge voice in American politics because of Twitter and Facebook and the profusion of blogs and the ability of the internet to give everybody a platform that they can use. So it kind of permeates the culture in a way that it didn't before.
Susan, take a listen to what President Clinton said about that day.
I was in my calculus class, my fourth period advanced math class. I was a senior in high school. It was right after lunch that I heard my teacher, Doyle Coe, was the assistant principal, and he was called to the phone, and he came in totally ashen-faced and told us the president had been shot. I remember it as if it were yesterday.
What did you think?
I was heartbroken. I was hoping he would live.
And Susan, as you know from covering politics, Bill Clinton modeled himself in many ways after JFK. Long before he was a successful politician, he was very proud of a photo he had when he was at the White House as a young student and appeared with the president. It became campaign lore for him. How many modern presidents have looked to the example of JFK?
You know, I think every politician that followed JFK, even those that didn't agree with him on his ideology, knew that he captured something in Americans and inspired Americans. And actually, one thing we talked about how it was a loss of American innocence, a different era now, and yet John F. Kennedy's words continue to inspire a lot of Americans, a lot of American politicians. How many people have you heard just in the past few days, as we note this very sad anniversary today, have talked about the words in his inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," and how that still resonates with people. And maybe that's a little bit of a hopeful note.
Susan, I want to get you to speak on something that I've noticed, sort of filibuster. It's all the rage talking about that right now. Filibuster abuse really starts in a lot of ways in the late 50s. Folks pushing back against the potential for civil rights legislation, which JFK and LBJ, of course, helped bring into reality, which changed the electoral map, which in many ways led to a long period of Republican presidencies and now the more recent Democratic presidencies with the same map that we've been seeing pretty much since since 1964. So Barack Obama is one of the results, long-term results, of that civil rights legislation that began with battling back against filibuster reform, and now we're at the other end of that train, fighting against the filibuster. What does that make you think about?
Well, it certainly illustrates the arc of history, doesn't it? And of course, John F. Kennedy was slow to get behind the civil rights movement in the view of civil rights activists at the time, but eventually he came around and took a more active role. It was one of the things that was costing him some popularity at the time, just before his assassination, that he was standing up against the segregationists in the South, and it was his assassination that helped propel those landmark civil rights legislation through the Congress, with LBJ backing them after his death. And now Barack Obama. Race has defined so much of American history and so much of American politics, even to this day. And now with our changing demography, changing it, affecting our politics in ways that I'm sure would astound John F. Kennedy if he were alive today.
Certainly interesting to think about. Susan, before we go, though, it's important that we point out how you got on the show today. You defeated a tough group of competitors on Steve Kornacki's world-famous Up Against the Clock.
Nice.
This week, Senate Republicans blocked Georgetown University law professor Nina Pillard's nomination to serve on what court?
D.C. Circuit.
The D.C. Circuit is correct. 300 points for Susan. Ends the game. What's the score? Susan Page, 1,200 points. You have defeated Robert Costa and Shane Harris, and you are the new. Wait, we claimed you're the reigning champion still. You get this mug.
You should be extremely proud. You got the high score, the championship mug, and the gift certificate. But this weekend, there is an interesting twist. The competitors on Up Against the Clock are all MSNBC talent. We have Karen Finney, Alex Witt, and our very own Touré. Obviously, all of us here on the cycle are rooting for Alex Witt.
Of course.
Anyway, tune in tomorrow morning at 8:44-ish Eastern Standard Time. And up next, imagine your phone rings, you pick it up, and it's a call from a loved one who has died years ago. That is the premise of a new book from a best-selling author, Mitch Albom, on life, love, and the power of redemption. He joins us right here in the guest spot next.
And I'm telling the world, you're mine.
A wonderful gift with your loved ones. Don't miss this chance to own one of the most meaningful collectibles of our era. Call and order now.
And paying tribute to a life taken too soon, the solemn remembrance of the 50th anniversary of JFK.
Bells toll in Dallas, and a wreath is laid at the Eternal Flame at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia as the nation remembers President John F. Kennedy. Memorials were held around the nation today to honor the late president who was assassinated 50 years ago today.
The main commemoration was held in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, where the president was shot as his motorcade was driving through back in 1963. Tori Dunnan has more.
People around the country came together just as they did 50 years ago to honor the life of President John F. Kennedy. At his burial site, a wreath laying at Arlington National Cemetery. In Kennedy's hometown of Boston, Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick laid a wreath at a statue of the slain 35th president. In the House of Representatives, where Kennedy served from 1947 to 1953, a guest chaplain recalled his famous words.
Help us, Lord God, to make the late president's inaugural vision our own, so that together as fellow Americans, we may ask not what our country can do for us, but rather what we can do for our country.
In Dallas, where President Kennedy was assassinated, about 5,000 people were invited to Dealey Plaza to commemorate the 50th anniversary.
He spoke to the point and with confidence. He knew words matter. His words changed lives. His words changed history.
Bells tolled throughout the city of Dallas at 12:30 p.m., marking the moment when President Kennedy was shot. A new monument to the fallen president was unveiled, with an inscription from the final paragraph of the speech JFK intended to deliver on that fateful day. Many older Americans we talked to in Dallas say they felt a deep connection to President Kennedy. And today, a younger generation got to see why. In Dallas, I'm Tori Dunnan reporting.
Here in L.A., the Olympic torch at the Coliseum was lit just after midnight as part of the JFK commemoration. The Coliseum was where Kennedy accepted the Democratic Party's nomination for president in 1960. The torch will burn until midnight tonight.
KGLA will have much more on the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination coming up at 1:30. Here are the rare audio tapes between the Air Force Command Center and the White House.
When you find out that Oswald is implicated in the murder of the president, that you're dragged into it as maybe an accomplice, and your reputation is besmirched unfairly for years. The police wanted you to sign a confession statement. What did you do?
Well, when Captain Will Fritz came into the room where I was being interrogated, he had a confession already typed up, and he put it down in front of me and gave me a pen. He said, "Sign this." And so I started reading it, and I looked up and I said, "I'm not going to sign that." I said, "That's ridiculous." And so he got real red-faced, and he drew his hand back. He was standing to my left, and he drew his hand back, and so I put my arm up like this to block, and he then reached over and got the paper, but before he did that, I told him, I said, there's policemen outside this door to my right here, but I said before they get in here, I said, you and I are going to have a hell of a fight.
So he wanted you to sign a confession that you were an accomplice in the assassination of the president? Is that essentially what it said?
Yes.
Now, you were later fully exonerated. You had nothing to do with it, but you were sort of like a criminal in Dallas for no reason, and you had a tough time finding work. People would really just finger you, avoid you. How long did that take to get over?
Well, that's something I never really gotten over till to this day. After that time, over the period of 50 years, I've had a rough time finding employment. I've had some employment in those 50 years that I really enjoyed, but they're few and far between.
But you stayed in Dallas. To be credit to you, you stayed in Dallas. You stuck it out. Let me ask you this: to this day, 50 years after the fact, do you think Lee Harvey Oswald alone killed the president?
I do not believe he did that alone. I'm not convinced he did it at all.
Really?
But yes.
Do you know, did he ever go up to that place, the 6th floor? Was that a place he frequented? Is that a place he normally would go? You know anything about that?
Well, as I said, I taught Lee how to fill orders, so Lee could go to the 6th floor if he needed to go up and get a certain title from that floor. Yes, he could go up there, but on that day,
and no one would
some
question
people
it, right, Peel? No one would question it. That's what he does. That's where he works. No one would raise an eyebrow.
That is correct. No one would question him.
Amazing. Buell, thank you for taking the time. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Buell Frazier. You know, the sky was no limit for President Kennedy. He made it a goal to put a man on the moon, after all, by the end of the decade. The goal was ambitious, some said ridiculous, but Jack Kennedy was tenacious.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
This chimpanzee who was flying in space took off at 10:08. He reports that everything is perfect and working well.
Kennedy saw the need to have a program that would excite the American people. And then he got all involved in it himself. All the way up to the time he died, he saw that this was coming along, and he saw that the American people themselves were behind the program.
Colonel, this is Colonel Glenn.
Oh, listen, Colonel, we're really proud of you, and I must say you did a wonderful job. Thanks, Mr. President.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
We were challenged to do something no one thought we could do by Kennedy. We were challenged to do the impossible. How about this for vision, guts, dreamer, whatever you want to call him? 3 weeks later, the President of the United States, you talk about a goal, 60 minutes of spaceflight experience, he says, okay, folks, we're ready to go to the moon. I don't know that the people believed it was possible.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. Thank you.
To Larry Sabato, who wrote the book on the Kennedy half century. In fact, he called it the Kennedy half century. Larry, we forget what an audacious, if not ridiculous, goal that sounded like at the time. With all of 60 minutes of space experience, we were aiming for the moon, furthermore, before the decade was out. What do you think of that?
It really was, Neil. You know, I'm here in Dallas for the commemorative events today, and I've talked with an awful lot of people, and I asked them, what do you think John F. Kennedy's legacy is? And the space program is mentioned more than anything else, because I think people understand this was President Kennedy's personal initiative. He cared about it deeply. He took the time